Most businesses get very little out of AI compared to what they could, because the real power in using AI is to make it part of an overall workflow to automate things that happen day to day. So today I'm going to compare 5 different automation platforms for AI. I'm going to tell you which one I would choose if I were you. And I'm going to talk about a few things that others might forget when comparing those platforms. So let's go ahead and get started.
Here's why it's so powerful to have AI as part of an overall workflow. The difference is simple. If you open ChatGPT for every invoice, every support ticket, you're just adding another manual step. You still copy and paste and you move data around. And so putting AI inside automated workflows means the system does it every time in the background without you having to lift a finger every single time. And let me show you how that would look in reality. In the case of an IT support team, it makes sense to not respond to the same questions all the time. That team might want to put frequently asked questions on the website. And so this workflow can do that pretty much automatically, and you can have a approval step in the middle. But instead of having to copy and paste things from different systems, it can publish a frequently asked question article online automatically. So based on a ticket that was resolved in Zendesk, the AI tool can summarize the solution, and it can, from that, create an article that can then be posted on the website with the support manager notified that there is a new article published on the website.
So let's see how those platforms position themselves. Zapier says they go from concept to enterprise ready automation in seconds. And they have this ChatGPT like prompt that gets you to a first version fairly quickly. Make.com, they see themselves as maybe a bit more forward looking, a real time visual orchestration for AI agents and automations. I think this is more their vision than what they actually deliver right now. But I think the focus there is really on this sort of pane of glass that you can see all of your workflows and agents and how it really all works. It's beautifully designed. So Make might want to go in that direction. They're not quite there yet, I would say, but that's how they pitch themselves. With N8N, you can see right away this is a development-focused platform. The way it's designed, the way they pitch themselves as a AI workflow automation for technical teams, and in the use cases, IT ops, security operations, DevOps, those are mostly development and IT-focused workflows. Of course, you can do sales and marketing use cases and everything else, but that's how they pitch themselves, and I think this is where they're really good at. And it also speaks to the type of user, which is maybe more a technical developer rather than sort of the typical business user. With Workato, then, you get into a more enterprise-focused platform. They say they're the next generation of agents built for the enterprise, so that's what they provide. And again, here, this is more visionary. So you can see this is very businessy, the way it's designed with the charts and the dashboards. So they look at their platform really as an orchestration for different types of automation workflows or agents as well, and primarily geared for the enterprise. And we'll get into why exactly that is and what trade-offs that comes with. Finally, Lindy is probably the first AI native workflow automation platform. They pitch themselves, interestingly, as your first AI employee. So they don't see themselves as an automation platform per se. They say you create virtual employees, agents that are then part of your team. They also have this ChatGPT-like interface where you can just define what you want to build. The difference to Zapier is this is really their premise. So you build with natural language and not with workflow nodes that you configure yourself. All right, let's see how easy it is to get started and use those different tools. Starting with Zapier, if you Google for a particular template or automation, Zapier already has tons of them ready that you can just start using. You have to authenticate with those tools, but getting started is fairly straightforward. I'd say overall the usage or ease of use has gotten much better in recent months, so I'd give this a 4-star. With Make, similarly, you have lots of apps and built-in functionality. I think the workflow builder, while it looks nice, it has a bit of a learning curve. So similar to Zapier, but I think it's not quite there, and getting started is not quite as easy. N8N, by definition, it's developer focused. That's how they position themselves. You can trial with the cloud version. So without installing anything on your own environment, you can try out how N8N works. But again, learning curve fairly steep. What I will say, and why I give 3 stars instead of 2 here, is there are lots and lots of community provided templates. You'll find pre-created workflows that work pretty well. It's on you to determine how exactly they work. So 3 stars instead of 2, just because the community features or the community available workflows are pretty good. Workato, I'd give 1 star because you can't get started without talking to a salesperson. You cannot really use the tool. There's a huge sort of lead up time with Workato. Their features are great, but if you just want to try something, Workato is not an option. And then Lindy is just a text box. You can just enter something in Lindy. I want to build X, Y, and Z, and it will just build that for you. Now, if that works, that's a different topic, but to get started, ease of use, it's fairly intuitive. I had to give this a 5 star, but it comes at the expense of some of the other features as we will see. Workflow engines are really dependent on the tools and services that you can use with them. That's why integrations is one of the major factors in determining what workflow automation tool, what AI automation tool you can use. Zapier, it's been around for a long time. They have a huge app integration catalog. So over time, most SaaS tools have written their own integrations with Zapier. So if you have to connect to tools that you're already using, Zapier will be your friend here. Similarly, Make has caught up with some of those integrations as well. Lots and lots of apps are covered. On top of that, while not quite as many as Zapier, they have better support, I'd say, for things like data storage and databases. They're a bit better situated than Zapier. N8N, it hasn't been around, or at least popular, for quite as long as the other two. The out-of-the-box catalog is smaller, but again, because the community is so strong there, you might find some integrations that someone built based on APIs of those tools. And so I'll give this a 3 star out of the box, but this can provide a lot of functionality in terms of integrations of different apps and databases. Workato has definitely done their homework. There's integration with pretty much all of the relevant SaaS tools and infrastructure, databases, event queues, and so on that you would expect in an enterprise. So everything that's an ERP, a CRM, databases, that should work pretty well. On top of that, while N8N, you can do everything on premises and install that if you don't want to use a cloud version, Workato is the only tool of this list where you can work with databases and other services that you have on premises. And in Lindy, it's the newest tool of all. It doesn't have all the integrations that you might expect. It is focused more on things around productivity and automated call center handling. So around those topics, the integration depth is pretty good. But other than that, aside from the most commonly used tools, it's not quite there. They've promised to catch up there, but I'll have to give this a 2 star out of 5. One of the aspects that is often ignored when it comes to automation workflows are things like error handling or reliability. So let's say you've invested dozens of hours in creating a workflow. Inevitably, at some point, something will go wrong. And so when that happens, you need an automation tool or a workflow engine that gives you a bit more details about what is not going well. And this is where a lot of those tools fall short or are distinguished from one to the other. Zapier, for example, it can be really shaky. So Zapier is great to get something started, and when it works well. Once errors creep in, it can be really shaky. There's caps on the amount of things you can do. Sometimes things just fail silently. So you don't know they failed until you go digging into some of the error logs. Not great. I've learned my lessons there as well. So I have to give this a 2 stars. Unfortunately, that's one of the things that really turned me away from Zapier. So not great, but there are some features that help you with error handling. With Make, I think the error handling is a bit better, although debugging them can be a bit painful or opaque, so it's hard to understand what the errors sometimes means, but it's a bit better than Zapier and a bit more of what you would expect from a workflow engine like that. And then even better, I think the error handling works quite well, especially if you're a developer and you know what you're doing. You're often getting the errors that you would expect. And on top of that, if this is a self-hosted deployment of N8N, then you have full control. So you can add monitoring, you can add logging outside of that. So you have much more flexibility, but of course that comes at a cost. You have to do it all yourself. If you're used to development workflows, N8N has a good way of showing you where some of the errors are. Workato, again, it's geared towards those sort of development enterprise focused use cases. They have an SLA where they promise a 99.9% uptime, strong error handling. They have an audit log. You work with Workato as you're used to working with other enterprise geared development platforms. I think that works pretty well. And then Lindy, ultimately, it is an AI first workflow, which means once something is not working well, you're pretty much screwed. That's a bit exaggerated, but sometimes I have the impression that even building workflows caused some errors in a way that I had no way of figuring out what was going wrong. And so Lindy wasn't really a help there. The only way of solving the error was starting over completely. So Lindy is really not a platform where you go and try to solve errors yourself, at least not yet. And that to me makes it much less reliable than some of the other platforms here on the list. And then, of course, something that will be important for everyone, right? Price and predictability of costs. So one thing you probably want to avoid is when you deploy a whole bunch of those workflows, that 2 weeks later, you get a bill that has hundreds and thousands of euros, dollars, because you didn't really track how much you used. For example, Zapier is priced per task. So that's one step in those workflows. So sending an email is one step. Reading an Excel spreadsheet is one step. And so that adds up pretty quickly, especially with complex workflows where you have lots of steps, lots of branching, maybe sub workflows. When you use Zapier, the number of tasks that are used for that add up very quickly. They have different tiers and you can add additional tasks for those tiers, but prices go up pretty steeply. So unless it's simple workflows with just a few steps, Zapier is not a good choice. Make, I'd say, has a pretty good price value ratio. Their price per operation, which is essentially one execution of the whole workflow. There as well, per tier, you get a certain amount of credits that you can use. And once those credits are used up, you have to upgrade to a higher and pricier tier. N8N is quote unquote free when you host it yourself. Of course, you have hosting and monitoring and the time that you put into running that deployment that will cost you, but the direct cost, so money that you pay to N8N, is zero in that case if you self-host it. There is a cloud version, of course, where you can pay for N8N to be hosted by N8N. It's a bit more expensive than Make, but still cheaper than Zapier. And there again, it's priced per workflow run. So every execution of workflow is priced as one credit. Workato, I'd say predictability wise, it's a bit better. So you know roughly what to expect because the price is fairly high, higher than all of the competitors. You usually sign a deal where you have a minimum commitment of a certain amount that you pay every month or every year. That comes with a certain amount of credits. And once those are used up, you have to pay for additional credits as well. Workato prices per workflow runs just like the others, except for Zapier. So you have a bit more predictability because you buy those credits in bulk and you pay a minimum commitment for that, but the price is fairly high. And then lastly, Lindy, also price per task. Now, task here is different than task that you see in Zapier. Here it's again priced by workflow execution. You have maximum usage per tier. So that means once you've used up all of your credits for a specific tier, you would have to upgrade to the next higher. Once you're hitting the limit of what a simple workflow can do, this is really when you get into sort of development focused features. And if you have requirements with regard to compliance and more control over who can use the tool, you really need some of the enterprise IT features. We talked about a higher price for Workato. This is a thing to foreshadow a little bit where you get sort of the bang for the buck for Workato. But let's start at the top. Zapier has features that allow for custom coding, which is actually pretty handy and extends the functionality of Zapier a lot if you know what you're doing. So I'll give this a 3-star. You can add single sign-on and you have basic enterprise features that are covered by Zapier already. So it's a good sort of what you would expect from a platform like that. Similarly, make similar set of enterprise features that are covered. They are better in Zapier with things like JSON handling, API handling. When it comes to custom code in nodes, it's not quite as good as Zapier. So trade-offs, if you need to code something with Python or JavaScript, use Zapier. If you deal more with wrangling JSON data and JSON files, if you work with APIs a lot, Make is probably a better choice. N8N is a developer-focused platform. Fantastic at what it's doing. Basic enterprise needs are covered as well. This would get a 5-star out of 5 if it had some of the features that Workato has. So Workato gets 5 stars. Why? Because they have essentially everything you would expect from an enterprise platform. You get single sign-on, you have audit functionality, lifecycle management, you have development, a production environment, you have version control. So everything, if you're serious about developing workflows and process automations, Workato has all of the features you need. Like I said, N8N would be almost there, but it's lacking some of those enterprise features. Lindy has mostly none of that. That's not the use case right now, or at least that's not where they are. So lacks most enterprise features, and it's not really a development-based platform, at least at this moment in time.
Just when I got ready to upload this video, I scrolled through my LinkedIn feed and I saw this message from Make. Apparently, they now have code steps as well. So you can use JavaScript and Python in Make as well. So that puts it feature-wise at parity with Zapier. And I think that definitely would deserve another star. So when it comes to developer ratings, Make is really doing a good job. And that just shows that those platforms evolve every day. But enough for that. Let's continue with the other feature comparisons.
And then that's the step that I think a lot of people miss when they compare automation platforms with each other. Privacy and GDPR compliance, especially if you are a company in the European Economic Region, so that's the EU, Switzerland, UK usually, you might want to choose a platform that controls where data flows. So for example, if you connect things that have personally identifiable information that should not cross outside of the EU, then some of those platforms are lacking in the possibility to do that. For example, Zapier is hosted on AWS in the United States. So if it's important to you that your data stays within the confines of the European Economic Region, then Zapier is not an option. There is no EU data residency. They have some things that they did to make it GDPR compliant, but it's all on you to make sure that you are. The data is stored outside of the EU. So it That just means it's not feasible for some use cases. You can't really control views the data and the logs well. So I give this 2 stars, not really great if you are based in Europe. Make.com is a bit better. So they explicitly provide EU data residency, at least for the paid tiers. So you can do a lot of what you have to do given that you are in the European Economic Region. N8N, you have full control if you host it yourself. It's open source. You can control exactly what data flows to which system, what's prevented. You can control that with firewalls and so on. So this is a 5-star, assuming you host it yourself. When it comes to the cloud version, you can also choose hosting in Europe, or you can choose where data residency is. So I think N8N is pretty good when it comes to privacy, GDPR compliance, especially if you choose to host it yourself. Workato, you can host yourself, but they have, as you would expect, the EU data residency possible. They have fine-grained permission controls that allows you to say, like, this person can only see that kind of data. So when it comes to controlling who sees data, where it's hosted, Workato is in a really good position. And then Lindy, they are focused on call center use cases. So they claim they have HIPAA compliance when it comes, for example, to automated receptionists in medical offices. They don't have any GDPR measures, at least from what I could see. So I'll give this a 2 stars. Finally, we started saying those automation platforms are really good because you can make AI part of the workflow. Now let's look at the AI readiness and how good they're actually doing that. Starting with Zapier, they kind of had to play catch up compared to some of the more AI native platforms on that list, but they've done their homework. They caught up over the last few months. They have connectors for some of the common LLMs, so OpenAI, Anthropic, Google with Gemini, and you can make those LLMs part of your workflow. They even have some good approval workflows where you can have a human in the loop. It's pretty good. It's not best of class, but it has the most important features in that realm. I'd say Make is a bit better. What they do better is sort of this human in the loop process where you can more than just say yes or no. You can have specific branches based on how the human operates. So you can say, yes, this is good, no, stop this, or try again with some changes. And then the process adjusts and you just have a bit more control over how you run the workflow after the human in the loop step. And then as a development platform, they have most things that you would expect. Plus, I think what they did pretty smartly is they don't see AI just as one step where you feed it in a bunch of data and you get something out. N8N has this notion of agents where you can connect an LLM, but you also have a memory feature where you can hook up a database, and the AI agent has access to different tools. That means that the LLM, based on what comes out, it can decide which tools to call before it returns any data or any answers. And what that means is that the workflows are not fixed in how they work and operate, but based on how the LLM behaves, it has some leeway to change how the workflow operates. Now, that comes at a cost with regards to reliability or expectations that are being met. So it's DIY. You have to worry about how these agents really respond. But you have a much greater range of uses for N8N. As an example, you could have an agent workflow that says, you are my personal assistant. Here are all the different tools at your disposal. And then whatever, let's say, voice command is being issued, you as the agent step decide what to do with that. Open my calendar, create a spreadsheet, look into the CRM, whatever it is. It's more sort of based on how the agents work rather than you as a developer defining that if this, then that. So a bit of a different concept, and I'll give it a 5-star because of that. Super powerful, much harder to use. Then Workato, you have most things that the other platforms have as well, probably closer to Make and Zapier. I was in between 4 and 5 stars there because it has a lot of AI functionality. Lately, Workato has pitched themselves as orchestrating different agents as well. The direction they're going, and I think they haven't fully executed on that vision, is they want to provide you with a set of agents that you build, but can then be orchestrated with one another, and you have a good overview of how they operate, and treating those agents more like automated employees of some sort. So it's less focused on workflows, at least when it comes to the vision, and more focused on automated collaboration between agents. Bit of a foreshadowing. So, in 12 months, this might look much different. I don't think they're quite there yet, but they definitely have a vision. And so 4 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, Lindy is built as an AI native platform. It has agents at its core. You tell it what to build, and it builds that with AI. It uses AI pretty heavily. So 5 stars. Now, it's early stage. So sometimes this is unreliable. And while it can do a lot with AI and it's pitched to do everything with AI, it's not always reliable. So it has 5 stars in terms of features, but at times this is really unreliable. All right, summarizing those 7 dimensions, I'd say N8N and Workato probably win the most medals of best in class for those different dimensions. However, I would not walk away with the summary that N8N and Workato are the best platforms. It really depends on what's important to you. So if you ask me, what should I choose? Those platforms are good for different use cases. Use Zapier if you need to get started quickly. You have easy workflows that you just have to connect to systems with each other. Zapier is a great use case, unless, of course, you have personally identifiable information and you're in the EU, but we've talked about that already. Choose that if GDPR is important to you. If cost efficiency, of course, is important to you, I think Make has a really good price cost ratio. It is good all around platform that you can choose if cost is important to you. Choose N8N if you're familiar with development workflows, if you work with a lot of APIs, and again, GDPR is important to you, I think N8N is a good choice. Workato, I think, should be clear by now, is really good if you're a large organization. If you have a need for specific governance, if you need to report on who is using it, how they're using it, and you want to follow established best practices in terms of development, Workato is your tool of choice. Just be aware it comes at a cost, and there's no easy, hey, I'm going to try it real quick. This all comes with a longer sales cycle and, like I said, higher costs. And then Lindy, I really don't know. I mean, I have some people that tell me online this is the best ever and so easy to use and it solves everything. I think when it works, it just works. I've had some good experiences with it, but then at other times it just failed and was miserable to use. I don't really know. I think it's a little bit too early to say because Lindy is a fairly young platform. I'm curious to see what they do in the future. But I'd say if you're planning on using workflow to a larger extent in your business, defer to one of the 4 at the top and keep an eye out for Lindy maybe in the future.
All right, that was a comparison of the 5 most commonly used workflow automation platforms that are out there. This, I'm well aware, barely scratched the surface. So if you're interested in specific aspects, if you want to know more about the different platforms, specific use cases, let me know down in the comments. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and I will see you next time.